Hello. It's good to see everyone. Thank you for being here. Um, so, I've got two things to cover today. And I'm going to start with the not Peter Tatchell, but with the other story. So, seven Pakistani rapists have been sentenced in the UK. These were seven members of the Rotherham rape gang. Hello, Silvile. Hello, Crochetter, my dear. It's good to see you. Um, and there was no mainstream media presence at this sentencing. There was no interest in covering what had happened. So I thought that I would play a short piece from British TV so that some of you might get an idea of what exactly happened. Right. So the tweet reads, a detailed and harrowing report on seven men jailed for rape, indecent assault, and trafficking of girls in the Rotherham grooming gangs. An 11-year-old girl was raped by over 150 men with only 38 convictions. There's more of these child rapists free than caught. Right. So let's go ahead and get started with an update on this story.
Welcome back. Your time is 4:40 on this Friday afternoon. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, seven Rotherham child abusers have been jailed for over 100 years after harrowing crimes against girls. Today's sentencing is the result of a 5-year investigation by the National Crime Agency as part of Operation Stovewood. To get the latest on this, our national reporter Charlie Peters is live for us at Sheffield Crown Court. Charlie, welcome to the show. You've been covering this case since the very beginning. Yesterday, when we spoke, you read out some incredibly moving and impactful victim impact statements that two survivors issued to those seven monsters in court. Today, they finally were handed justice.
Finally.
Charlie Peters, tell us more.
Well, the CPS and the National Crime Agency have both
Hello, my love.
thanked
Hello,
the
darling.
fortitude and the bravery of the victims for coming forward in this case and to help those investigators to achieve justice. Now, the judge here also thanked the victims for standing up, for bringing forward their testimony and for getting that justice as well. And yesterday, that comes after we saw one of the victims in this case take to the witness box and deliver a very powerful victim impact statement towards the defendants, all seven of them avoiding her eyes as she told them, I am your karma. You took my childhood, you took my innocence. Now I am taking your freedom.
Good for
Extremely
you.
emotional and charged atmosphere in the courts as she delivered that powerful statement, with the public gallery, the families of the perpetrators watching down on her as she delivered that statement very boldly, without interruption, reading from notes, but mostly looking at them in the eyes as they tried to avoid her gaze, looking towards me, sometimes in the press gallery, sometimes staring at their families, mostly staring at the floor. Well, now they'll have plenty of time to reflect on what they heard from the victim impact statement in prison, as they were put down for a total of 106 years. Now, those seven defendants were Mohammed Amar, who was given 14 years imprisonment. Yasser Ajaib was given 6 years. Mohammed Zamir Sadiq, 15 years imprisonment. And there was an exasperated shock in the public gallery as that 15 years was handed down. Mohammed Sayab was given a 25-year sentence. He received his sentence via an Urdu interpreter inside the dock. He waved to his family in the public gallery as he was led away, with one of his daughters shouting, I love you, Dad, as he was taken from the dock. The judge said that he was a persistent and cruel sexual predator. He was 27 at the time of the offending. His victim was just 11 years old, and she detailed during her statement yesterday and in the 9-week trial here that concluded earlier this year how she was trafficked around cemeteries, a nursery, supermarket car parks, hotels and the homes of her abusers to endure the most harrowing and horrific ordeals. The lengthy and relentless abuse that she endured at the hands of up to 150 men before she turned 16. Also sentenced after that lengthy sentence, following a break, Mr. Justice Slater came back and handed down a 24-year prison sentence to Abid Sadiq, who's already facing 20 years in prison from a previous conviction in 2019, also handed down by the same judge, also from an Operation Stovewood National Crime Agency investigation. He was described as a cunning and determined sexual predator. He committed these crimes while under investigation already for separate offences. You knew what you were up to and you continued doing it. That is what the judge said today as he sent him down for 24 years. And then Tahir Yassin was sent to 13 years imprisonment, and Ramin Barry, the last to be sentenced for 8 counts of rape, 9 years imprisonment. Now, the men here convicted of a string of child sexual offences, rape, indecent assault and also trafficking. Many of the charges were so harrowing to hear in court and were summarised again by the lead prosecuting barrister yesterday, who said that the girls were preyed upon and they were vulnerable victims at the hands of these appalling criminals. Now, they will face an extended time in prison. There will also be an extended time on licence once they are released. The National Crime Agency's Operation Stovewood looking into the historic abuse endured by over 1,400 girls and boys in Rotherham from 1997 to 2014 has achieved several criminal justice victories, but this is almost doubtedly one of their largest. By my research, it's the second largest since the operation was launched in 2014. They've achieved now some 38 convictions, over 250 arrests. They've identified and contacted some 1,150 victims, and their investigations continue apace. Now, that comes after the Alexis J report found that thousands of children in the town had been neglected by the local authorities. They looked the other way due to political correctness. They did not want to rock the boat over community cohesion because so many of the perpetrators were of a British Pakistani background, overrepresented in this kind of abuse in Rotherham. It kicked off a national discussion about child sexual abuse, which has seen more reports from Rochdale, Telford, Newcastle, right across the country.
All over the country.
Which has been exposed by
100
several
cities.
investigations.
100.
It is an ongoing national scandal, but today, with 106 years handed down, 2 survivors and the wider community that supported them will feel a great sense of justice.
All right. Now, yes, it is. But in the UK, there was a particular problem and something that made that situation unique. What made that situation unique was that all this was happening out in the open. It was not secret. However, stop me if this starts to sound familiar. The authorities did not want to push too hard and investigate too much for a couple of reasons. One, the majority of the victims were considered to be throwaways. You know, the kinds of girls who couch surf. And maybe girls who can be accused of throwing themselves at older men. In actuality, they were girls who came from working class or poor backgrounds. They were in foster care. And they were considered expendable. And even the Sikh girls who were brought in as part of this, the Sikh girls who were also trafficked and raped, despite the Sikh community being incredibly, incredibly cohesive, and members of the Sikh community coming forward to protest loudly about what was happening. There's a difference between the Sikh community and the Pakistani community. And I'll tell you what that is. The Sikh community is not violent. So, and the Pakistani community in the UK is very violent indeed. Now, if you, not just violent in terms of actual terror attacks and stabbings and all that, and this hideous sex ring case, but also in terms of the blackmail that can be subtle and not so subtle on the part of community leaders directed at the authorities. That if the authorities push the community too far, well, we don't know what's going to happen, do we? You know, there's only so much we can do to control our community when we're being targeted for having our deeply held beliefs or whatever horseshit these people were slinging back in 2016. Right. The British authorities were afraid of the Pakistani community. And it was that fear and that intimidation that resulted in a sex scandal. And I don't even want to call it a sex scandal, a rape scandal that went on for decades in upwards of 100 British cities. Cities like Rochdale, Rotherham, those are the ones that stand out the most. But it happened all the way up and down the country, and not fuck all was done about it. Some of the girls were labeled as prostitutes. 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds were labeled as prostitutes and had their accusations dismissed out of hand. One of the victims was prosecuted. One of the victims had the equivalent of CPS in the UK show up at the hospital after she gave birth to take her child away. The pressure and the smears were relentless year after year after year, and that's why, thank God, for people like Maggie Oliver, who blew the whistle on the whole business and made it impossible for people to look away anymore. So, now, if you want to call me a racist for pointing out the obvious, that the majority of the men involved in these rape and trafficking rings were Pakistani Muslim men, go at it. Be my guest. Sling as many stones at me as you like. Shoot me with as many arrows as you like. Absolutely. Go right ahead. It's not going to work, but give it your best college try. But while you are insulting me, I'll give you something else to insult me over. If I had been the judge in that case, and I know that it's the UK, but let's say with all things being equal, this is my wish list. You know, if I had had my druthers, I would have sentenced them all to death. I would have executed each and every one of them. Every single one of them would have gotten the death penalty. That would have been my sentence. And I know the Brits don't have the death penalty, but I'm saying if this had been me, because I'm a defender, I'm a believer in the death penalty. And so you can go ahead and call me a monster and for pointing out the obvious. We can see with our own eyes exactly who was behind these rape gangs. It took way too long to bring these men to justice, but I'm glad that now she's now 31 or so, the 11-year-old who was trafficked and raped by over 150 men. I wonder what certain people in the community would say about her. Maybe she was just disposable. Maybe she was running wild. Maybe she had it coming. You know, because not all 11-year-olds are alike, right? Not all 11-year-olds are the same. Some of them just ask for it, you know. That's what we've been told, isn't it? Well, sorry, but I still believe in the concept and the idea of statutory rape, and that's exactly what this was. And if you are going to make distinctions in terms of a person's victimhood based on whether you like them or not, the color of their skin, or their socioeconomic background, or any other completely irrelevant detail, then you are the problem. I'm not the problem for stating things as they are. You are the problem because you have a real bias, all right? Just like I don't give anyone a pass for committing these heinous crimes based on the color of their skin or their socioeconomic background or their first language or anything like that. I have been decrying this for years now. Nobody can say that I'm a latecomer or that I'm jumping on a bandwagon. I've been talking about this issue for years. For years. And I have been shaming the people who haven't been talking about it. You know, the people who claim that they're so in favor of defending children and women's rights and all of that are remarkably silent. Remarkably silent when it comes to this matter. People living in the UK who don't have a word to say about it. Okay, I see you. We all see you. Moving on. Moving on. Oh, I might as well turn this on. Hang on, let me turn my begging bowl banner on. And I guess that you guys have realized that now we are able to receive super chats, super stickers. You can become a member, or at the very least, you can subscribe, as Nightbot is bullying you into doing. Nightbot is sending out periodic reminders to please subscribe and like, and I would really appreciate it if you would do both. All right. Now, speaking of cowardice and people who have a lot to say about all manner of issues, but not a peep about this, it's fascinating to me, since we're moving on to Peter Tatchell, and I will preface what I'm about to say. Actually, it needs a little bit of an intro. Peter Tatchell is a man who has been a gay rights activist in the UK for decades. Nobody can take away the commitment that Peter Tatchell has shown to the gay community. And what I particularly respect about Peter Tatchell is that when it comes to the perils and the discrimination and the horrendous treatment that gay men and women face in countries around the world outside of the West, the majority of the gay organizations have been completely silent. I mean, every now and then, if Uganda passes a horrible bill, somebody will pipe up and say something about it. But when it comes to the treatment of gays in Chechnya, in Russia, across the Middle East, in every country except for Israel, Africa, we have an abundance of examples of, in South Asia, of course, we have an abundance of evidence that gay people are being persecuted around the world in ways that we cannot even begin to imagine. And the archipelago of gay rights organizations has been silent on this because they have turned their attention for the past 10 years to the trans issue and defending trans people who are not gay. And many gay people question whether they even belong as part of the rainbow. Peter Tatchell is the only Western gay rights activist that comes to my mind. I'm sure there are others, but he's the only one I can think of who has been vociferous in protesting the treatment of gays in countries where the gay rights organizations don't want to touch because it's racist, because it's bigoted, because it's whatever the fuck excuse they can come up with. And Peter has been the only one that I can think of who has actually made an effort to call out these countries. So for that, and nobody can take that away from him. No one. However, and I noticed that on social media as well. All these gay content creators who were crying, about being gay and being singled out or being persecuted or whatever. It's amazing how when I have questioned a number of them on a number of occasions and said, why don't you ever talk about what's happening in Chechnya? Why don't you talk about Iran? Why don't you talk about Uganda? Why don't you talk about Pakistan? Why don't you talk about Gaza and the way gays are treated in Gaza? Why don't you say anything about that? Oh, it's none of my business. I don't want to stick my nose into it. These are people who have stuck their noses into our family. These are people who have stuck their noses into the deed to the house. These are people who have dug into my marriages. These are people who have dug into every single aspect of my personal life, dug into the medications that I take, dug into everything, but that somehow is their business. But when it comes to defending their gay brothers and sisters, all of a sudden it's like, oh no, that's something I can't involve myself in. All right, well, I see you too. I've been seeing you. I know what you're made of. Well, If you're not going to defend your own fucking community, then I guess it's up to me, isn't it? So, okay. Having said all those things about Peter Tatchell and praised Peter Tatchell has also gotten himself into a lot of trouble. And I'm going to play a part of a recent interview where he talks about the trans issue, and we're not going to listen to the whole thing. It's quite long, and there's a lot of repetition in it, and there's no need to belabor points unnecessarily. And he was interviewed on Heretics, the Heretics channel, by Andrew Gold. You know that I love me some Andrew Gold. And after it uploaded, there was a lot of criticism of the way that he conducted this interview because there was a certain issue that he did not bring up. And so he was criticized for it, and he got uncharacteristically angry and started snapping back at the critics and said that he knows that there is like an elephant in the room that he didn't address when it comes to Peter Tatchell, and that he was going to write a piece about it on his andrewgold.com website or Substack or whatever. Well, I'm going to let you know what it is. I'm going to explain what it is that Peter Tatchell said more than once, in front of more than one audience, and in more than one outlet, that has gotten him into the shit, and rightfully so. But for now, what we will do is we will watch part of this interview with Peter. And, you know, it really pains me. It pains me to talk about Peter Tatchell this way, but Peter Tatchell has made a lot of enemies in the gay community. And at the end of this, you'll understand why. You'll see. But Peter has really done the utmost. And for him to spend the latter part of his life basically, you know, erasing all the good that he's done for the gay community by engaging in this type of dishonest discourse. And the other problem that he has, again, we'll cover it at the end of the stream. But for now, let's just go ahead and listen to what he said, what he and Andrew discussed with regards to the trans issue. Let's go.
Two-track system. If you were straight in an opposite sex relationship, you had rights. If you were gay, lesbian, or bisexual, and you had a same-sex relationship, you didn't have rights. It was a clear differentiation based on sexual orientation.
So I think this is where I wanted to start where you and I obviously agree. And I'm so amazed by the work that you've done. And where we disagree, as you know, is with regards to the trans side of this. Because when we talk about the rights, with dealing with the T, a lot of people believe that we're impinging upon the rights of other people, which is typically women in this case. What do you say to that?
I think there's a lot of confusion. Biological sex is a reality. So is gender identity. They're two different things.
No.
And in both cases, people have rights. You know, biological women, they have rights. Trans women and trans men, they have rights. There shouldn't be a conflict situation. These are two different things, and there's a space for everyone.
So with regards to, these are the obvious ones, but women's prisons, women's changing rooms, women's sports, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, of course, there are circumstances where trans women who have been convicted of violent sexual offences against women
You mean men?
should not be in women's spaces.
No, men
Absolutely.
shouldn't be in women's spaces.
But that is not representative of the majority of trans people. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny minority.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't fucking matter how tiny the minority. It doesn't matter if it's one person. It doesn't matter. The numbers don't matter. What matters is that we have had too many examples over the years of men, violent offenders, who have announced that they are going to transition, or that they have transitioned, or they announce that they're a woman and they're placed in women's prisons. This is not a thing that has happened once or twice or three times. It's happened many, 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 many times. And when the women who are locked up with them complain, they're the ones who are threatened with disciplinary action. Or they're told in places like California, well, if you kick up a fuss, don't be surprised if we testify against you at your next parole hearing. Again, doesn't matter if it's one rapist or 100. Men have no place being locked up with women in women's prisons, particularly violent sexual offenders. And I think that one of the misconceptions that we have is we look at the examples in Orange is the New Black or Wentworth, and we think, well, look at these sickening, fabulous Yas Queen trannies that, are on those shows. That's not what I'm talking about. I am talking about intact males, not on estrogen, who haven't had their business removed, who were violent, who have proven themselves to be violent, who are sexual predators, who are locked up with women in women's prisons. That's what I'm talking about. So let's get the Orange is the New Black and the Wentworth idea out of our heads. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about locking you up with Patrice motherfucking Royale or Laganja Estranja or Gigi Gorgeous or somebody like that. We are talking, or what's her name? Adore Delano, who is now convinced that he's a woman. He's not. We're not talking about that. We are talking about violent, intact men who are sexual predators. All right, let's get that straight. Let's continue.
Mm-hmm. So, when it comes to women's prisons, any trans person with a history of sexual or physical violence against women, they have no place in the women's prison. When it comes to women's sports, I'm not in favor of a blanket ban on trans people. I think there ought to be an individual assessment.
What assessment?
Because trans men and women are not all the same. They come in all kinds of shapes and sizes.
It doesn't matter, they're men.
I have a friend who plays for a women's football team. Mm-hmm. She's trans. She's one of the smallest and weakest members on the team. You can't say that she's got an advantage or that she is, outperforming the women players. The cisgender biological women tower over her, or some of them do. So I think individual assessment, not a blanket ban, but individual assessment. Sport has to be fair. So if there is demonstrable evidence that someone has an advantage because they're trans, then of course that wouldn't be right.
Of course they do. Of course they do. How many assessments do we need? Jesus Christ. In 1972, when the East Germans presented their athletes, their female athletes, at the Olympics in Munich, and we got to look at Cornelia Ender, the swimmer, or some of the women doing shot put, track and field. And the East Germans had been running a program for years where they were doping up their female athletes. And people got to look at them and said, what the fuck, And there was one American woman who medaled in Los Angeles. And she said, this was in 1980, and she said if the Russians and their satellite countries had not boycotted the Olympic Games, because, no, it was in 84, because 80 was when the United States boycotted the Olympics in Moscow because of the Russian invasion of Afghanistan. So the Russians reciprocated, and they pulled themselves and all of their Soviet satellite countries out of the Olympics in 1984. And one of the American swimmers said, if the Russians had not boycotted those games, along with the East Germans and everybody else, I wouldn't have won a medal. She was very upfront about it, because everybody knew that the Russians and the East Germans and the satellite countries were cheating. Everybody knew that. Obviously, the presence of testosterone in a female body, or in the body full stop, is going to give an advantage. It will give you an advantage. Not all the time. Not all the time. However, what we've seen in track and field in particular is that these women who are what we used to call hermaphrodites, but who are genetically male, women like Castor Semenya, who is genetically male, have a clear advantage. She has internal testes, and so she naturally produces an enormous amount of testosterone. Should she be allowed to race against other women? Of course not. It is absurd. We block athletes from doping to avoid allowing them to have an advantage over the other athletes, and yet we allow biological males to compete against women. And they apparently don't do those cheek tests anymore. They don't do the scrape anymore. The boxers were allowed to compete in Paris against women. Those men were allowed to compete in Paris because they were using the gender on the passport to determine whether or not they were male or female. The whole thing was a farce. And if you're still going to tell me that that Algerian man is a woman, after watching him wearing a truss, sitting on the shoulders, spread-legged, of his coach, which no Algerian woman would do, walking around Algeria with no hijab on the head, completely uncovered from head to toe, walking around with the freedom of a man, and you want to tell me that that's a woman? You must be fucking joking. All right, let's continue.
But in many cases, trans people are not like that. You know, they're just playing sport. And you can say that, you know, all men who've gone through puberty have an advantage.
They do. They do.
Because of, you know, puberty.
They do.
Well, not quite. You know, most men will have an advantage. But then again, if a trans woman undergoes hormone treatment and lowers levels of testosterone, in many cases they won't have that advantage.
That's not true.
So again, I'm talking about individual assessment.
That is not true. A man who... How did we get here? How did we get here? Have you ever asked yourselves, how the fuck did we get here? No. Going through puberty changes the body in fundamental ways in terms of the bones, in terms of the bone structure, in terms of the heart, the lungs, everything. There is a tremendous difference between men and women. And when males and females go through puberty, there is a difference. And men do have an advantage. They do. This has been established scientifically going back years, decades, perhaps hundreds of years. But now this has to be questioned because a bunch of entitled men want to put on dresses and beat women up at the Olympics. It is uncalled for and outrageous.
But fairness is paramount. I agree.
My understanding is the vast majority who've gone through puberty will have larger bone structures
Right.
and things like that will give them that advantage. It's rare to find even a short man who's gone through that, regardless of their gender identity, who isn't significantly stronger than probably all the women on the team. The person you're referring to must be quite exceptionally weak as far as men go.
Well, the rest of the biological women on the team are big, hench women. You know, they're biological women, they're cisgender, but they're big bone, very strong, lots of muscles, compared to this friend of mine who's trans.
It's just so hard to sort of make a policy around this, isn't it? I see what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, individual assessment already,
Based
when it comes
on-
to sport, there is individual assessment.
Based
You know,
on what?
Athletes.
An individual assessment based on what? If you don't believe that puberty separates men from women, then an individual assessment based on what? On what? Because we can't do cheek scrapings anymore because apparently that's too offensive. What are we basing the individual assessment on? Do we do genetic markers, or is that discriminatory? It's meant to be discriminatory. Sports by nature are fucking discriminatory. That is why we have men's and women's divisions.
Testosterone levels and other hormones and chromosomes are tested and checked. Well, let's do that.
So what about...
I also think there needs to be more research because we don't really know
What research?
what advantages male puberty gives and whether that...
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. We know it. It's been established. This is not a mystery.
It's lasting if a trans woman, in this case, undergoes hormone treatment and so on. We don't know. And so I'm all in favor of more research. And on the basis of that research, then we can come to a decision.
Yeah, but I presume that before that research is conclusive, we don't start putting biological males in female sports and vice versa until we've got that conclusive evidence.
Well, again, there needs to be individual assessment.
Based on
if there
what?
is clear demonstrable advantage, fair enough, But look, all elite athletes have advantages. Michael Phelps won all those gold medals in swimming. He had huge biological and other advantages over other male competitors.
Yeah. Michael Phelps was not racing against women. You get it? You dig? A young athlete who is like over 6 feet tall, over 7 feet tall, is going to have an advantage in basketball over a guy who's 5'2". I think we would agree. Likewise, a man who is 5'3", 5'4", or shorter is going to have an advantage in gymnastics because of the requirements of that sport. What does this have to do with anything? It's completely and totally irrelevant. Michael Phelps's physical advantages, yes. Everybody loves to bring up this bullshit about the long wingspan. So the fuck what? He was racing against other men. He wasn't racing against women. That is the fucking point.
Had an exceptionally large heart and lungs. He had a huge 6'7" arm span.
Yes.
He had huge feet, which are almost like flippers.
That was actually Ian Thorpe, but again, Ian Thorpe was not racing against women.
Pretty gigantic feet and hands, and that gave him clear advantages in the pool. But no one's saying that he should be stripped of his medals.
Well, but there's a reason we do split men and women. Because of the the strength differences are just so large. And also there is a cultural aspect, isn't there, of sort of men for so many years beating up women.
Yeah.
I think that's what a lot of people saw with the issues. And I know this is also controversial, but with Iman Khalif and there were two boxers, weren't there, who
Two men.
believed to be men
Two
believed
men.
to be women. But if they were men, the fact is they won every single game 5-0, which no one else had done at that Olympics, and absolutely destroyed more experienced boxers. That's the issue people are worried about.
Yeah, and I understand those worries, and I think that they should be taken into account, and people should look at them. But again, I say individual assessment. No blanket bans on trans. We wouldn't have a blanket ban on Muslims or black people or gay people or others.
Oh my God, that is such a dishonest argument. We are talking about physical advantages that men have over women, especially in sports that require strength and speed. I hate it here. I really do. I hate it here. I hate the fact that we even have to discuss this. This is absolutely fucking crazy. This is craziness.
We would make individual assessment.
But there is a blanket ban on men going
Yes.
into women's sports. So I suppose that depends if
Well,
you
there
think
used
those
to
men
be.
are women or men.
Yeah, well, that's the issue to be debated and to be more than debated. A decision taken based upon evidence. I mean,
We have evidence.
people often say, well, it's all down to XX or XY chromosomes.
It is.
And that is a very good marker.
What do you
to
mean a very good
distinguish,
marker?
But it's not the only one.
Really?
Because there will be people who may have, for example, an XY chromosome, a male chromosome, but will have naturally or by hormone treatment, women's breasts and hormones and other aspects of.
A person with XY chromosomes is male. XY chromosome, male. XX, female.
femaleness. So often their physical body shape changes. A lot of trans people say that when they undergo hormone therapy and so on, that their physical strength decreases.
Yeah.
So again, it's all down to individual assessment.
Yeah, but based, again, he keeps on repeating this. This is why I don't want to listen to the whole interview. He keeps on saying individual assessment. Individual assessment of what? If he doesn't believe that a man, by definition, has XY chromosomes, if he doesn't believe that a man going through, or a boy going through puberty, has real biological, physical advantages over women, then what are we assessing? What is the metric that we're using to make that assessment? I don't get it. I don't know what he wants. And the most maddening thing is he does not believe that trans women are women. Or so he says. I think he's flip-flopped on this point. But in this interview, he says that. Okay. Well, if trans women aren't women, then by definition, they are fucking men. And they shouldn't be competing against women. This is like a tautology. It's maddening. Let's continue.
We also need to look at the very important issue of the growing body of evidence, which suggests that the brain structures of trans people are different from non-trans people.
Yeah, I've read that as well.
What difference does that
People
make?
say it's just a women are fancy. Well, I don't think so. There were twin studies in 2013 which showed that where one twin was trans, in non-identical twins, where one twin was trans, only 2.6 of other twins were also trans. But in the case of identical twins, a third of twins were both trans.
What the fuck does this have to do with men and women competing against each other in sports? What does this have to do with anything? And I would like to take a look at that study. I smell bullshit, but let's continue.
And that would indicate a genetic component.
The directors of the Matrix. It's twins, aren't they? Are they twins?
No, they're
trans?
not.
I don't know.
Ah.
Yeah. But the other thing is, say that there have been more than a dozen studies by universities in Belgium, the Netherlands, and Spain, which show that the brain structures, processes, and activations of trans people are more like their desired affirmed gender identity rather than the gender at which they were assigned at birth biologically. So there is something there, but again, we need more investigation. We need more.
It doesn't mean that these people should be locked up with members of the opposite sex. It doesn't mean that they should be permitted to compete against each other in sports. It doesn't fucking mean that these men should be able to take away scholarship opportunities from women. It doesn't mean that they should take away jobs that are designated for women. It doesn't fucking mean that they should be permitted to run rape crisis centers in Scotland. And I don't know if you saw this. I spoke about this yesterday. That the man who lied and said that he was a woman, there was an investigation conducted of the conditions in that rape crisis center, and he's had to step down. And now there's been a call to go after the women who appointed him into that position. Whether the brain is different, that's a very interesting point that we can discuss. I'm not terribly interested in that, but it is, interesting intellectually, I guess. It has no bearing on whether or not violent men should be locked up in women's prisons. This is, I'm trying to stick to reality. I don't give a shit what studies say. I care about what's actually happening on the ground. That's what I'm concerned about. And I know what I've been seeing for the past 10 years, and I don't like what I'm seeing. And one of the most shameful things that I have seen the gay community do, an absolutely disgusting show of cowardice, under the guise of being kind, and civil rights and all that horse shit, is the drugging and the mutilation of gay children in those gender clinics. Again, under the banner of Be Kind. Autistic children. A large number, a disproportionate number of autistic children, particularly girls, are going through this gender abattoir. It is an extreme form of conversion therapy, the likes of which we haven't seen outside of Iran. We used to consider this to be barbaric and uncivilized, and now it's considered to be an act of kindness. And we're watching an entire generation of gay children being drugged and mutilated, and the gay community is applauding it. I am absolutely disgusted by the cowardice of these so-called gay rights organizations, from Stonewall to the Human Rights Campaign to other organizations like Planned Parenthood, organizations I used to love and respect. Appalling.
Research.
My understanding was that what I've seen of those was suggesting that there is something in the brain that's different, but it's not something that makes them any more like women. So it's just something that is something different, and we need to figure out what that is. And I often mention exorcism because I lived in Argentina for a long time, and I went and did exorcisms as part of a documentary I was making. And if we look at the sort of women to men, teenage women, which is a slightly different demographic to the kinds of men who often transition, we're looking at a very similar group of people to those who have exorcisms, and also a very similar group of women who have who suffer with anorexia and things like that. So it might be there's something in the brain that leads them to have more likely to be depressed or have depression or struggle with growing up in a very difficult world, that leads them to think they either have a demon inside them, as with exorcism, or what some people call the gendered soul with trans.
Okay, well, I think that's an interesting point, but I think it's imprecise. When I did the standalone video on the movie and the book Sybil, and then I did a live stream following the premiere of that video, the thing that struck me about it, I think that many of you may know if you've been following me for any length of time. If you're new to me, then you may find that this is surprising. Sybil was a massive hoax perpetrated by the psychiatrist who treated that woman. And it turned into an international phenomenon. And the whole idea of split personality became like a pop culture touchstone. It was discussed on Sally Jesse Raphael and Geraldo and Phil Donahue and Oprah. It was discussed on the magazine shows. And one of the things that fascinated me about this, first of all, the psychiatric establishment is not in complete agreement that split personality, DID, or whatever they're calling it now, is even legitimate, if it even exists. But one thing that people do agree on is that if it does exist, then it is not as widespread as some would have you believe. It certainly was a social contagion back in the 1970s after the release of Sybil. It became a social contagion again in like 2019 or so. It became a TikTok fad where you would have young people going on TikTok and claiming that they could switch from one personality to the other. It was all bullshit. It was all false. But the thing that fascinated me was that when it comes to psychiatry, for some reason, psychiatrists and people who specialize in brain disorders or personality disorders or whatever have never quite found a way to be comfortable treating women. This goes all the way back to Freud and before. But there were too many stories of women going to see psychiatrists because they had garden variety depression, They were bored housewives. They were feeling dissatisfied with life. They were depressed because of the burdens of child rearing and being a housewife, not being able to work outside the home, being dependent on their husbands to take care of them. and just a general sense of ennui, and they would go to a shrink, and the shrink would diagnose them with split personality because the diagnosis became so popular. So it was a 20th century social contagion that predated satanic panic. This is what we're seeing again. So I think that there is a more accurate comparison between the trans thing now, what we're seeing on social media and in the medical establishment, and what we saw with multiple personality disorder in the 1970s. I would say that, and of course, the granddaddy of them all, satanic panic. They're all very similar. All very similar, and perhaps there is a tie-in to exorcism in Argentina, but they're all belief systems where when it comes to psychiatry, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I guess that's the best way of putting it.
I think that makes it. I think what I struggle with is what is it exactly? And I don't want to sound like that "What is a woman?" Matt Walsh guy, if you know who I'm talking about. But what is it? I want to understand from a trans person when they say I'm actually a woman, when it's a man. What traits are those that make them woman-like?
Well, you'd have to ask a trans person.
No, you tell us.
You shouldn't be asking me.
You tell us.
Yeah. You've worked with them for some time. And I can't get them on here. They won't come on to talk. So you're the best I can get.
Okay. Well, I am no substitute for interviewing a trans person.
They won't come on.
Okay, fine. I'm happy to answer the question, I think, again, it all boils down to we need more research.
You see what I mean?
Research, but the evidence so far would suggest that there is something about the brain structures and processes of trans people and a genetic component which predisposes or inclines them to be trans. So it's not simply because they've woken up one day and said, I'm trans. It's not a whim or a fancy. It's something deep-rooted.
No, that does happen, though.
That many of them have known and understood for decades from their earliest, memories. So I don't think we should dismiss it in the way that it has often been dismissed by some critics. I think we need to, show kindness, understanding, and a willingness to look at the research and to have more research to establish the facts, to establish the evidence, and on that basis we can make wise, constructive decisions.
I agree
so no
with you
answer.
We need more research. But,
a big dodge.
I think we're both men of science. I think. I don't. Yeah, I presume. Are you an atheist? Not that only atheists are men of science, but are you secular?
I'm an atheist, secularist, humanist.
Yes. Okay. So am I. And I'm not. I don't mean to offend religious people because they can be people of science as well. So I'm not.
Yeah, but this trans thing is a secular religion. It's a faith-based set of beliefs, is what it is, with no evidence or very scant evidence. And powerful brainwashing components in the form of social media, societal pressure. There are lots of different factors. But what we cannot deny is that there has been an explosion of young people going to these gender clinics, and that so many of them are on the autism spectrum, and the vast majority of them are gay. So we need to start asking ourselves why. And why are so many of them girls? What's going on there?
I was suggesting that, but we're both that way inclined. And for me, that old Carl Sagan, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Right.
And that seems to be what you're saying as well. And yet we have these situations, like recently in Australia, where Roxy Tickle wanted access to the Giggle women's only app and won. So policies are being changed based on something that you yourself admit we need a lot more research done about. That's the issue that a lot of us have, and that's why support for trans, I think, has gone down.
Very
Not
much
that
so.
We should ever have support for individual people going down. I mean, they're people and they're humans, and we should appreciate and respect them. But it has gone down over the last few years since people tried to change policies. That's the issue many of us have.
Well, I think, again, there are some policies that needed to change. Others are more open and controversial and subject of dispute. But the important, core issue is that trans people have human rights, and there have to be really
What does that have
compelling
to do with
reasons
anything?
to in any way deny them access or rights alongside everyone else.
No, but I mean, he himself has said that he doesn't believe that trans women are women. That was a woman-only app. So what right was being denied him? A man who was, by definition, excluded from a woman-only app. I don't understand. It's not a woman. And now you're beginning to understand why we're not going to watch this whole thing. I'm already being driven crazy by this circular argument.
And in not all cases is there that evidence. So I think we need to, always err on the side of including trans people.
Why?
And only exclude them if there's some compelling reason why they shouldn't be included.
Yeah, because
In that
they're men.
It is usually only a tiny, unrepresentative sample of trans people.
That's not true. That is not true, because the question now becomes, how many of these people, these men primarily, you notice that it's not women claiming to be men who are the problem. I think that you've noticed this, right? They're not the ones who are kicking down doors and demanding to be on men's teams. They're not the ones who are demanding to be in men's spaces, although I do have to say, just based on my powers of observation, that when women transition, they pass a lot more convincingly than when men transition. And I'm not just talking about Buck Angel. I'm talking about the content creators that I have seen on social media who go from being women to taking testosterone and going through that change. And they are indistinguishable from men, right? But they're not men. And they don't have that, at the risk of offending any of the men who are watching, they don't have that male entitlement to be part of a space that they don't belong in. They were socialized as women. And they are women. I'm not saying that it's genetic for women to behave a certain way, but when you are socialized as a woman, as a female, from the time you're very young, there are certain there's certain moves that you won't make, like what they're doing, like what this Roxy Tickle person did, horning his way onto a female-only app, making literally a federal case out of it. Sal Grover lost that case, but she is going to appeal, and she's going to follow it through to the highest court in Australia. And I wish her all the luck in the world, because that loss was an outrage.
Who we're talking about. Let's not generalize about all trans people. They're not all the same. They're huge variety, a huge range of different trans people.
When you say let's not generalize, what are you supposing that I'm generalizing about?
Well, I'm not saying you, but a lot of trans critics want a blanket ban on all trans people in sport. And I'm saying, no, that's not the right approach.
I agree.
Have individual assessment. So where someone does have, where there's evidence of a demonstrable significant advantage, then perhaps there is a case for excluding them. But we need to do that on a case-by-case basis, as athletic and other sporting bodies already do. They do make individual assessments. They do test people's testosterone, do test their chromosomes. Let's pursue that. Let's do it more in depth, and let's get the right answers.
With regards to women's spaces, then let's look at the Roxy Tickle and Giggle app. Sal Grover being who was sued and lost, and I think is now going to take it to the High Court. I think what I struggle with is I understand what you're saying about we need more research and we need to understand and we need to not ban people from certain things, but it feels a bit like the God argument, which you can't really disprove. And again,
I'm going to go up to this.
Physiological, but also psychological, emotional, and so on. That's what happens in most cases.
Why has the number of trans people shot up?
Social media.
I agree with you that it seems to have always been trans people to an extent. Why has the number shot up in recent years?
Social media.
For the same reason that more and more people came out as gay after, the early campaigns to challenge prejudice and discrimination.
But it's been legal to be a trans person for years, and no one was stopping them from getting off with other people or marrying other people. Hang
on, the Gender Reassignment Act, or the Gender Recognition Act, was in 2004. That's not that long ago. Sure, but what I mean is that gay people
couldn't come out because they would be arrested, right? They would be and shunned and all of those things.
Yeah.
There was more support for trans people before the policy started to change.
That's true.
People seem pretty okay with it. And I've spoken, totally anecdotal, but to many, many women who say they used to have trans people in their bathrooms all the time and they didn't really mind. As you say, it's for the most part not really an issue. It became an issue when policies were being changed and people saw laws being changed around them that took away rights from women.
Right.
So I just think, as you say, more research needs to be done, but that has to be done first before.
Going back to the numbers issue, you know, people used to say in the 1980s, or even before the 1970s, gosh, there's a huge explosion of gay people, wherever they all come from. It's a social contagion.
Nobody said that.
It wasn't
Nobody
true then.
said that.
It's not
Nobody.
true with trans people now.
Who said that? Who fucking said that? Nobody said that. I don't recall a single instance of anyone saying that gay people coming out of the closet or being gay was a social contagion. Are you fucking kidding? In the 1980s? Do you think that it was a barrel of laughs? Come on, Peter, you were there, so was I. We were both there. Do you think that being gay was the flavor of the fucking month in the 1980s? During the AIDS crisis? There is no comparison. As a matter of fact, I had friends who were very open about saying that they wish they hadn't been born gay. Friends who said that they wished that they had been born straight, that they could live a life that was so societally acceptable, where they wouldn't be under threat of dying from this terrible virus. A social contagion of homosexuality? Are you fucking kidding? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No. It became more acceptable and more visible. But we are not talking about somebody self-actualizing and saying, okay, well, I'm gay and I'm going to move to a gay-friendly town and I'm going to go to gay-friendly vacation places and I'm going to hang out in gay bars. No. We're talking about young people altering their bodies in order to become something that they are not. And you know, I'm really surprised that nobody is bringing up the obvious parallels to anorexia, okay? People, women mainly, but men too, but let's just say individuals who are anorexic have a form of body dysmorphia where when they look at themselves in the mirror, they see somebody who is overweight. Even though they may not have an ounce of fat on them, even if they may be skin and bone. But they see somebody who is overweight, and it's very distressing to them. What would we think if a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a counselor were to tell an anorexic, you're absolutely right, you are in fact overweight. And the best thing that you can do is to keep dieting and starve yourself until you die. Who would say such a thing? Why would any medical or mental health professional stand up and try to affirm a delusion in the mind of an individual who looks in the mirror and sees something totally opposed to what it is that they actually are? Now, I am not saying that gender dysphoria doesn't exist, nor am I saying that if you reach adulthood and you decide that you're going to operate, you're going to go on the hormones or whatever, that you shouldn't do that. Sure, you're an adult, do as you like. My concern is that grabbing kids when they're going through puberty, which is one of the most tumultuous times of a human's life, you don't know which end is up when you're that young. And your body is going through so many changes. And to tell them that there is a solution to all this confusion, and that solution comes in the form of puberty blockers, we can make all of this go away. All of this stress that you're going through because of the changes in your body, we can make it stop. We can slam the brakes on it. And then, down the line, If you decide that you want to start carving your body up like a Thanksgiving turkey, we have medical professionals who will help you through it. There are people who have another form of dysphoria or another psychological condition where they identify as quadriplegic, or they identify as blind, or they aspire to be those things. What would we think of a doctor that amputated the perfectly healthy legs of an individual who wanted to have no legs, wanted to be disabled, or broke the spine of somebody who wanted to be quadriplegic? We would put them in jail. So why is there an exception being made for young people who are in no position to be making life-altering decisions at such a young age? Why is this permitted? When I say that this business with drugging and surgically operating on kids and surgically altering the bodies of children is the greatest medical scandal of the 21st century, I am not exaggerating. I'm not. And the fallout is going to be a nightmare.
Because there's more openness about these issues, because there's more support, more people are realizing that they're trans and are seeking treatment.
But there was more support for trans people 10, 15 years ago than there is now. Support for trans people has significantly gone down as a result of what I'm talking about, but still more and more people are coming out, so the social contagion is still going on.
Yeah, because there's a support network, and there are places, organizations that provide affirmation and support.
That affirm delusions.
Although
yes,
public opinion may have shifted, although I'm not too sure by how much, I think that's very questionable, still most trans people feel that they're recognizing who they are, and that is why more of them are coming out.
It is possible, of course, and I know you're not saying it's not, that people were wrong about it being a social contagion with regards to gay people, and they might be right about it this time.
It never happened.
Well, that is possible, but it's of the young trans people that I've met, and I've met a lot over the years, they all seem very sure and confident in who they are.
Yeah, okay. Well, when I was a young person, I was also very sure and confident of who I was, and it wasn't until I got older that I realized that, wow, I really did know everything when I was 16 and 17. What a shame that I am so ignorant now at the age of 40, and I knew everything when I was 15, 16, and 17. It is preposterous. You are giving young people the right to make these decisions when they are not allowed to drive, they can't get a tattoo, they can't join the army, they can't drink. And yet you have enough faith in them to say, oh yeah, I believe it, when you say that you were born in the wrong body or whatever other horseshit exists. Anyway, all right, I am going to stop the interview here. Now, I'm going to explain why it is that Andrew Gold was criticized so heavily for this interview. And I will say this. Andrew Gold is a very, very, very good interviewer. I think that he's very respectful. He's not confrontational. He's not insulting. He doesn't go for low blows. He's a professional interviewer, and for that I commend him. However, if you're going to have Peter Tatchell on your show and you neglect to ask him about the 900-pound gorilla and the 800-pound elephant in the room, I have to agree that the critics were right, and that perhaps it was a mistake to just focus on the trans issue and not bring up the most glaring issue when it comes to Peter Tatchell. And that issue is that Peter Tatchell has been a long-time advocate for lowering the age of consent, in the vein of Michel Foucault, Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir. He's a very big fan of Kinsey, the sexologist, Kinsey's research, and not John Money, but the postmodernist influenced sexologist who studied age of consent and sexuality in young people. And the approach that he has taken It's ruffled a lot of feathers, and rightfully so. And he can make the claim that perhaps he phrased certain things indelicately, or that the letter that he wrote to The Guardian in 1997 was deceptively edited, and so on. Julie Bindel has called him out multiple times on this. However, he has been shown on too many occasions discussing certain matters that have made people raise their eyebrows, and I'm going to play a clip from a presentation, and this is one of many, by the way. This is not an isolated incident. This TED Talk that he participated in was not some unusual thing. He didn't lose his mind. He didn't go temporarily insane. He had been saying exactly this and writing about this topic for a very, very long time. Now, some of it is going to not make sense, so I'll do my best to explain it. Where is it? There it is. All right, let's it's showing, isn't it? Yes, I brought it up. Okay, let's listen to what he had to say.
In history, we know that Dr. Alfred Kinsey in the United States in the 1940s, he was the first person to give major statistical evidence that the categories of gay and straight are not watertight and mutually exclusive. He discovered that for many people, sexuality is a continuum between people who are 100% heterosexual and those who are 100% homosexual. A lot of people, he found, are to varying degrees somewhere in the middle, a mixture, an amalgam of different sexual desires and attractions. Now, these, of course, may or may not be acted upon, but in his respondents, he found high levels of both opposite sex and same-sex attraction.
I am going to be taking a deep dive into the research of Alfred Kinsey, the sexologist. On Rumble, I posted a live stream about Michel Foucault, a contemptible man who has been disproportionately influential in way too many fields of social science and philosophy and so on. Who had a tremendous influence on a number of fields, and unfortunately, the influence of the French philosophers and the deconstructionists bled out of English departments and sociology departments, and they bled into the STEM fields, and now we see the result of implementing some of the theories that they came up with. We have people like Judith Butler at Berkeley, who has been publishing incomprehensible books for decades on the subject of fluidity and sexuality and gender identity and all this. It makes absolutely no sense, but they have a disproportionate amount of influence and respect in academic circles. Well, when you can keep the Michigas relegated to academia, that's one thing, because nobody gives a shit. You graduate from college and you proceed to forget all that nonsense that they stuffed in your head. But now it's jumped the wall. You know, it's like a brush fire that starts small and then it consumes the entire village. That's what's happened. So let's continue with this, and I'm going to offer my explanation.
Insignificant proportions of the many thousands of men and women that he interviewed. They also recorded that in some Aboriginal cultures, such as the Koriki and Sambia in Papua New Guinea, all young men entered into a same-sex relationship with an older unmarried warrior as part of their rites of passage into manhood.
Okay, you hear what he said. They enter into a same-sex relationship with an older warrior as part of the rites, as part of a manhood ritual, rites of passage. And he specifically mentioned the Sambia of Papua New Guinea. Peter Tatchell is very fond of bringing up the Sambia of Papua New Guinea. He has brought up this tribe many times. Okay, but you all heard what he said. They enter into a same-sex relationship with older warriors as part of a manhood. A same-sex relationship. That deliberate choice of words makes all the difference because it sort of sanitizes it, doesn't it? Oh, same-sex relationship. Well, that's okay. Well, not exactly. All right, let's let him finish.
The older warrior taught them the skills of hunting and other manly activities, and that was allied with a sexual relationship. But once completed, those young men ceased to have homosexual contact and went on to marry. In other words, they went through a phase or a period of homosexuality where they were sexually functional.
They go through a period of homosexuality. Okay? He says, he characterizes the manhood rituals of the Sambia tribe of Papua New Guinea as same-sex relationships and then leaving homosexuality. Well, it's not exactly that way.
With another male, but then resumed what we might call the traditional heterosexual marriage path for the rest of their lives. And Clellan Ford and Frank Beach and others have concluded this would indicate that human sexuality is much more malleable than many of us acknowledge, that there's a cultural element in terms of expectations and mores that influences the expression of human sexuality. They said that if sexual orientation was pre-programmed at birth, if it was biologically fixed, it would not be possible for people to be bisexual, or in the case of the Papua New Guinean tribes, to switch from one sexual attraction to another.
Okay. Because I'm on YouTube and I'm not on Rumble, I can't go into detail about the nature of the manhood, the warrior manhood ritual customs of the Sambia tribe of Papua New Guinea. However, I will describe it in broad strokes. Boys are taken out of their homes at a very, very young age, sometimes as young as 6. But apparently the average age is around 10 years old. They are removed from the home of their parents. They're taken from their mothers. And they are handed over to the men who essentially, for the next few years, absolutely brutalize them. They are raped. And the best that I can say, the most detail that I can offer on this is that the Sambia, and I don't know if they still practice this custom, this ritual, or if they've abandoned it, but when he was talking about the Sambia tribe of Papua New Guinea, or the Sambia people, the belief of the Sambia men, or the Sambia as a whole, was that strength could be transferred from a man to a boy via semen. That is the most that I can say. All right. If you're interested in this topic, the tribe is spelled Sambia, Sambia of Papua New Guinea. Peter Tatchell became very, very interested in the Sambia tribe of Papua New Guinea and tried to extrapolate that custom to make a larger point about whether or not it harms children if they are subject to sexual acts at a very young age, whether it damages them in the long term, whether it alters their perception of self, whether it traumatizes them, whether it creates lifelong scars, and so on. Well, I would argue we don't know, all right, because the research into the Sambia tribe and their rituals was very self-serving on the part of certain anthropologists and sexologists. And because what I would say is when everyone around you, when you live in such an isolated culture, and there are certain expectations placed on you and you don't know any better, and all the boys are going through the same thing, then it's normal. It becomes normalized to a certain extent. But I don't know. I don't know if any in-depth interviews were ever conducted with these boys after they became men to ask them about their feelings. But these boys, Osria says it creates internal biases. All right. The problem with Peter Tatchell is that he has taken a look at these individual examples of tribes with these very brutal manhood rituals, where he says that they enter into homosexual relationships. They are not homosexual relationships. Yes, they are male on male. I wouldn't even call them relationships. They're based on power imbalances, and they are based on aggression. The Sambia, it's a very aggressive culture. And the goal is to impart a certain sense of hyperactive, hypermasculinity, a warrior ethos onto the boys of the tribe. And it's done sexually. That is not a relationship. Okay, I wouldn't call that a relationship in the same way that I wouldn't call, same-sex prison relationships among men homosexual relationships. They're relationships of convenience, or they're just out and out sexual assault. But imagine if we were to say, these men in prison who are brutalized in their cells, they are involved in homosexual relationships. Well, no, not exactly. I wouldn't put it that way, but that's just me. And of course they end up marrying women because that is the expectation. These boys are not gay. They are children who are removed from their home in order to be toughened up, to be able to take up the sword and the spear and everything else to protect the tribe. And it just so happens that instead of, some tribes will tattoo the young men or I can't remember what it's called, but there are tribes where they do things to the flesh. I think you've seen it. They don't look like tattoos. They almost look like bumps on the skin. There are all kinds of rituals, whether it's tattooing the face, tattooing the body, there are all kinds of things. And with the Sambia people, it just happens to take on a sexual component. But Peter Tatchell has been speaking rather admiringly of this tribe for many, 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 many years. And that, coupled with his insistence that the age of consent should be lowered from 16 to 14 in the UK, and his rationale for it, which is totally unconvincing, by the way. And I'm not saying this is a prude or anything. I'm saying that his justification is totally unconvincing, as well as the fact that he has spent a lot of time expressing views along these lines. And I am not suggesting in any way, shape, or form that Peter Tatchell has an interest in children. I am not saying that. I wouldn't suggest it. What I am saying is that he is far too glib and flippant about it, a little bit too clinical about it. And when people criticize him for it, he gets extremely touchy and very defensive. He claims that he's been misquoted. He claims that he got a bad edit. He makes all kinds of claims. And that was the nature of the criticism that was being levied at Andrew Gold on Twitter, when people were like, wait a second, how is it that you can have Peter Tatchell on? You spend the entire hour and a half talking about the trans issue, and you never once bring up one of the things that he's known for. And unfortunately, his interest in these tribal customs has overshadowed the excellent work that he's done as a gay rights campaigner, a very brave one, may I add. So, in any case, Again, because I'm on YouTube, there's only so much that I can say. I have to be careful. I'm sure that once I get full monetization on this channel, this stream will be completely demonetized. I fully expect that. The bots are going to sweep through it and realize that I will get the red dollar sign with the slash through it. I won't make a dime off of it. Whatever. It doesn't matter. Some things just need to be brought to light. And I have to say that as much as I admire Andrew Gold and as much as I think he's a fantastic interviewer and I love his channel, I think that he made a big mistake in spending as much time as he did on the trans issue and not bringing up this issue with Peter Tatchell, of all people. Now, I don't know if the precondition for Peter Tatchell sitting down with him was to not mention any of that stuff. I don't know if there were any conditions placed on the nature of the questions asked or the topics that would be covered. But I have to say that Andrew Gold, being as thorough a journalist as he is, I'm surprised he didn't bring it up. So I felt that it was my obligation, if I play a Peter Tatchell interview where he's talking about the trans issue, that it is absolutely critical for me to explain to the audience that there is more to Peter Tatchell than what you saw in that interview. And it's very, very dark, and Peter Tatchell needs to be called on the carpet for it. And he has been. Don't get me wrong. It's not like he's just been saying this and nobody's said a word about it. People have had a lot to say about it. What I'm saying is that I think that Andrew Gold made a mistake. He should have asked him about it. So anyway, that's it for me today. It's been an hour and a half. Thank you all for sticking with me so much. I would ask that you subscribe and like on your way out. If you're so inclined, please do become a member, or if you want to leave a dono, that's all the information down there. I want to thank you all so much for being here, and I will see you guys the next time. See you later.